Hey, David. Wait.
One of the things that have changed, one of the biggest changes that I've seen in the last 5 years is there used to be a focus on did you do your job the way you were supposed to? Did you do the necessary required things? And then it went from that to can you prove the basis of why those necessary and required things were done and why they were done, and then were they successful? So what's happened is rather than looking at a claim as a process, I'm going to mitigate. I'm going to extract water. I'm going to remove building materials. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this as kind of a procedural pattern. What's happened here in the last, it's been really heavy. I've been experienced it in my own practice for probably 10 years. Everybody else is getting it because of some of the ways that TPAs and TPCs are now being trained to work these projects. Okay. And they are being trained to work projects. It's become more of a checklist.
I wanted to talk to you about some appraisal stuff.
Oh, you don't want to finish the remote monitoring thing, the thing that changed?
We're going to come back to that. Okay.
Okay. All right.
Okay. I want to talk to you. I want to talk to you about basically three things. Okay. I want to talk to you about the umpire debacle, or I should say the appraisal debacle.
You mean the fact that I just got my butt kicked?
Yes, we could cause clock cleaned, ass kicked,
Clock cleaned, ass kicked,
drop kicked,
knocked in the you know what's.
yeah.
There's so many different ways to explain.
I mean,
We joke about this.
yeah, someone took all your beans. Yeah, so I mean,
Yes, they rearranged my beans, and now I can't find them. I'm told they're still there, but they're playing hide and seek permanently.
Yeah, and then I want to talk about vetting the umpire, and then I want to talk about remote monitoring because I think that remote monitoring has something to do, has some impact that we're not talking about in our industry very much.
So we're joking about us getting our clock cleaned, but we've talked about this loss, and it's kept me awake for probably about a week. Because at the end of the day, I don't mind I don't mind when I don't get the outcome that I think I should get. But I really, really take it hard to heart when I feel like the process itself has been subverted in a way that hurts the industry and hurts the client. 10 grand, while it may be important, it's not like having somebody ignore $200,000 worth of work on a project because they handled it like it was an adjustment or like it was a mediation and not like it was an appraisal.
Well, back up. Tell me about the loss. Tell me what happened and what data you collected, what you presented, that kind of thing. Where?
Okay, so I don't want to get real specific here, but because I can't imagine that this will not see the light of day in a more organized fashion in a place that's air conditioned with paneling. Lots and lots of paneling and seats. I can't imagine that. And it should.
You only think we're talking about you because you're guilty.
There's possibility of it.
No, look, seriously, David, one time I made a video talking about, I was upset that there was this pattern on some of these umpires were taking the roofs and putting them in as all O&L. And I just thought it was like, given the fact that the normal roof will have $3,000 worth of O&L, maybe. It just seemed like putting that as a paid when incurred was not rational. Especially when you consider some of these people may not have had that much O&L.
Right.
You know? But they were doing this. The umpires said they were doing this because that's what this particular carrier wanted. And I thought it was just such bad behavior. And I talked about it just not being like good behavior and we should really address this. And one of the umpires that does this on the regular, which wasn't talking about at all,
Right.
just flamed me, just came after me, and I'm like, are you guilty or something? Because I didn't know you did that. And so they outed themselves. So sometimes I think that some people miss what we're saying here, and like we do change the details a little bit on some of these things because we're not going to give out per se client detail. I get that, okay,
Right.
but I mean, like, this was a fire loss, right?
It was. It was a fire loss, and let's see. I picked it up maybe a year and a half, 2 years after the actual loss. There had been settlement attempts. There had been some outside alternate dispute resolution that had been attempted prior to it going into appraisal. The appraisal was requested on behalf of the insured, which drove it in. And let's see. It took about a year and 3 months to do, which is terrible. Okay. The my project or my process is I give everybody the opportunity to deal with the detail of everything. So anything that's in my file is in your file if you're my opposing, and that's if I work for a carrier or work for a contractor or an insurer. So we put up an entire file structure. We made a Dropbox. We sent everything off. We sent off, 70 documents, timesheets, or not timesheets on this one, but we sent off reports. We sent off pictures. We sent off emails. Sent off everything that we possibly had. And of course, then I requested on this particular project, I was working for a plaintiff, and I requested from opposing everything in the carrier's file. I need production. I need to know what you know. And, well, you need to know what you know, too. So when I got it, I actually took somebody off of my opposing's list. And I spent at least 4 to 4.5 hours over 4 different occasions vetting this particular umpire. So I felt like there was a guarantee that he was competent and would do the job. And I questioned him really, really hard. And we'll get to this at the end of what we're doing. The appraisal itself failed. I've been struggling with, did I fail?
But we'll look at what you did, though. Let's look at what you did, because I think this is the stuff, and I talk about this with you often with some other people. Okay, so I mean, that's one of the reasons I want to talk.
We do appraisal training and stuff like that. Okay,
so but let's talk about the extent to which you documented the loss. I think you told me something about the fire department and some other things.
All right, so here's the thing. I'm a true believer in any place that you leave a fact open or don't provide a fact structure, someone will at some point come and make their own determination and try and stick their opinion in. You'll stick your opinion in, they'll stick their opinion in, and opinion wars are generally not terribly fruitful. At best, they're baby splitting contests, depending upon who is the better arguer at the time or the better debater. So I ran through, and it's a fire loss, but more or less burned the roof off. Burned down into the second story, in about half the structure down into the first story, and it's stood over an attic, or not an attic, but a basement area, like a cellar area underneath. Okay, completely involved, water every place, truly every place. So as I went through and I looked at what was originally done, carrier wrote probably about 60% of the value, which is kind of interesting because in Florida there's valued policy law. And the way I wanted to set up the file is I wanted to know, number one, what I thought I needed to do. So I went and I met the opposing out. We Matterported the project. He got a copy of the Matterport. I went through and wrote my scope, and then I contacted an engineer. And I said, okay, I need you to come back in. This house was built, early 1900s-ish. So we have building materials and stuff like this. Nominal wood is not the same measurement as normal dimensional wood is.
Was this
and
balloon,
that dimensional wood?
was it balloon construction as well?
It was not.
Okay.
It was in an area where I would have expected it, but it was a poor person's farmhouse. The
Okay.
bloom construction we typically get in, in the upper end houses. We get it in the mansions downtown and
Where you can
things
have
like
the
that.
really long boards and yeah.
Yeah.
Got
So anyway, I brought the engineer in, and the engineer came through the structure and said the entire roof comes off, all of the attic trusses come off, half of the second story needs to be pulled out and reframed, all right, and we have to rework the engineering. The entire house has to be gutted from stem to stern. Sent me in the report. Then I contacted the local building department, and I said, hey, I want to make sure that when it comes time for this to be done, when you think means and methods, and everybody can have an opinion, but you're going to get the last one because you're going to tell us what we can and can't do here. He came through, looked through, reviewed the engineer's report, and said what he said. That's what you're going to do, what he said. So I have from an engineer and from code that the entire second story or the entire roof is coming completely off. Half the second story is coming off the framing on the floor and the walls around it. All right, which means then down to the first story, and everything is smoked out, which means basically we're going to turn the house into a skeleton in reality. Now, bear in mind, the house was underinsured, had less than $300,000 on a 2,000 square foot structure. Now, whose fault that is, I don't know. But we're talking about 2,200 square feet, right? And if you're talking about a brand new build where you're doing nothing besides working on a scraped lot, you're going to have a hard time getting that done in that market for probably, I got to think less than 220. If you're talking about down and back up, we're talking more like 300. So just the rough, broad numbers of this have us way, way past it before we try and decontaminate anything, do any kind of controlled demolition or controlled deconstruction, before we deal with any of the complexities of the fact that it's a good 40 minutes away from downtown. It's 25, 30 minutes away from a Home Depot. And these are all limitations, complexities, complications. How long does it take people to get there? This and that and the other thing. So we put all together this scope, and we meet out with the umpire, because my opposing now wants a walkthrough with my umpire, which is now my second trip out, and I'm not in the same state that this is in. We walk through the entire structure, and everything becomes magically about the fact that all of the damage that you see inside of the house that I wrote is now subsequent damage because the mitigation was not done properly. Now, the carrier was out within a week.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
You said you believed it was because the mitigation wasn't handled properly, or the carrier believed that the mitigation wasn't handled?
No, the carrier was. My opposing believed that all of the damages that wasn't written by the original adjuster was actually subsequent damage because it wasn't mitigated properly. Now, bear in mind, there's no power on the project. It's half burned out, so it's really not safe. Okay? It's parked maybe 10, 15 feet from a road, so very difficult to park anything there on a lot that slopes. So it's a more complicated mitigation with a limited liability or with limited policy amount.
Well, did that affect? Did the insureds take monies that came from the carrier originally and not do mitigation?
They tarped the roof.
Wow.
And part of the issue became that at some point the tarp blew off and they didn't replace it. And then there was some suggestion they really didn't tarp it, even though we find out at the end, when we finally do get some production from my opposing, that there was never, the carrier said it was tarped. So I don't know, maybe they took their word it wasn't tarped and it wasn't tarped, but nobody seemed to have an issue. If they had an issue, that would have been SIU.
Okay, yet in the appraisal, it was it was determined to be that there wasn't a tarp, even though those that had come before from the carrier had said there was a tarp.
It was, and you know what? I understand their position because there's no pictures of the tarp. So I went to the guy who put on the tarp and got an affidavit that said, I put on a tarp. I don't have a picture of it. He doesn't have a picture of it, but he was paid for putting on a tarp. So,
and in every world, that's incurred.
In every world. Now, you know what? I don't know if it happened because I can see, like everybody else, I'm having to rely on somebody else who says, I paid for the tarp to be put on. The guy who said that he put the tarp on said he put the tarp on. I've got to assume. No, I don't see any pictures. And in that sense, I understand their confusion. But you know what? It's not going to be an issue because by the time we get to the end of it, it wouldn't make a difference anyway. So the whole premise of why nothing else is being written on the inside of this project, because I produced all of my documentation, those reports, my actual ESX file to him. And my ESX file has line items. I beg him for his, which I don't get until the very end, and I stick it into my comparison matrix so I can see I wrote this, and then we agreed on one. And I wrote this, and we agreed on one. And this, we agreed, and then this, and this, and this, and he didn't. So you can see the difference between the two, and the umpire got that analysis. I call it a comparison matrix.
But what you could call it is the differences. And what do umpires rule on?
Well, and that's the point. There's the reason that I've got $30,000, $40,000 into this great big enormous spreadsheet with tons of VBA and programming in it, is so that we can produce just the differences for the umpire to rule, which is kind of part of this as well, because at some point, the umpire produces an award with no estimate, with no deliberation or delineation between coverage limits, A, B, C, D, policy types, right? And then doesn't exclude things that aren't appraised.
Did he do RCV and ACV?
He did RCV and ACV. He did. And acknowledged that he did it off of my sheets. So apparently, what I did, there was some improvement in what was awarded, but it was still far short. I stopped writing. I got to about 360. I had none of my mitigation work, none of the cleaning work that was necessary for it. And I didn't even start to consider the fact that the vast majority of the materials that were in this were really technically old growth materials. I didn't even hit the fact that, you know what, that 2x10, the dimensional 2x10 that was made out of the what do they call it, the old growth pine, I can't get that again. If I could, it would be 10 times the amount of an LVL or joist, that engineered joist that we would put back in, right? I didn't even go to the fact that I can't make floor levels match and things like that. We just did rough framing, and we were still 360, which is not surprising. Not surprising considering the nature of the project.
So what did the umpire do?
So we're not quite to that yet. So we come all the way through that. We come to the end, and everything's about they didn't mitigate, therefore nothing else should be paid for.
That's policy.
Pardon me?
That's policy.
Well, and again, yes, policy. Because this is in published, this is in writing, and verbally to the panel. Our job is to identify the damage. It's the carrier's job to apply a policy limit if one exists, or an exclusion if one exists. It's our job to recognize it. But in reality,
let the carrier, as you say, let the carrier do their job.
Yes, that's the carrier's job. That's the carrier's liability. And this is what I foresee happening. I'm going to put on my Swami cap, like Johnny Carson used to do.
Yeah.
Panels, especially the people in the panel that do this, that don't understand that they're actually acting as an appraiser and determining policy within an appraisal, are going to start getting litigated. And they should. All right? Because in reality, more often than not, what I'm seeing is I'm seeing the panel readjust the file and put in policy limits as a side-handed or backhanded way of saying it doesn't need to be covered or it shouldn't be covered. And that's what was going on here. They're looking at it and saying, hey, this is all subsequent damage. It shouldn't be covered because the insured didn't do their job.
So it's always centered on what? Not the damage, but the duties after
loss.
That's the,
Yep.
that is, and I look, I think that's trained somewhere. Remember, we used to, as adjusters, used to go in and explain to the insured their duties after the loss, so that there was no confusion. But
remember, the insured did tarp it. The carrier didn't ask for anything else to be done, and there's a reason that the carrier asked for nothing else to be done. About a month before we finally settled, we finally got, because I asked for, in the presence of the umpire, I asked for the carrier's notes from the initial inspections and their initial scope. Not just the estimate, but I want all the pictures that went along with the inspection. And do you know what every single picture said? There was a picture of every room, more than one of every room, all the way through the house. You know what every single picture said?
Probably it was damaged.
Water damage, smoke damage, and fire damage on all materials.
And so
we just spent a year.
We had a good adjuster. We had a good adjuster doing the adjuster's job. That is what I love. That's what they were trained to do. That's I see guys do that all the time.
They missed 2 or 3 rooms, but that could have been fixed.
Mm-hmm.
So the carrier, in my mind, the carrier isn't asking for anything besides a roof tarp, because they have in their possession, a week or 2 in, something that says everything's involved from when we start. The entire conversation of our project is, yes, I see all this additional damage that you wrote for, but we shouldn't be paying for it because the insured did not mitigate. Okay. Which is a policy determination, a policy limit. And you know what? And I see this a lot. My umpire was offended that the insured had taken advantage of the carrier by not doing this. And then there was a suggestion that because there was a public adjuster on the file, that maybe the public adjuster had gotten in the way of it and that the mitigation hadn't been done. And this is the conversation that's going on inside the panel. And I keep trying to bring everybody back. I'm like, if that's what they thought, then this was SIU. If everybody wants to yank this out and go back to SIU, then we need to talk to a judge. If not, then we need to actually address and write for the damage in front of us. So we get all the way down to the end, and we find out that the carrier, and ostensibly I would assume, unless that information was brand new to my opposing, he knew it too. And we'd spent 2 trips and an entire year of work when that report said it was all involved. And it was all involved several days post the loss. So I'm sorry, what in the world are you going to mitigate?
So wait a minute. So because that scope existed, if your carrier adjuster had gone back and gotten the complete claim file and seen that from the get-go, that should have informed his position, and this should have been almost a non-issue.
Yep.
So either 1, he didn't read it, or 2, he didn't care.
There's also possible more nefarious points or possibilities, but it would have been ludicrous for us to have had a year of conversation on the fact that it shouldn't be paid because it's subsequent damage, when everybody knew up front that it was completely affected at the time of the loss. Now, so bear in mind, I send my information in. I send in a 20-page report with 60 documents underneath it, grounding everything back out. I've had 2 site inspections. There's an engineer's report that says, gut it all and rebuild 3/4 of it, or at least half of it. I have an actual building department official that's going to be granting the code or the permits, that's going to be clearing the property as those permits are fulfilled and giving us a certificate of occupancy saying what the engineer said. I have an actual document from the carrier indicating that it was completely involved up front. I have no demand from the carrier for anything besides an initial TARP, which was done and paid for. And it wouldn't have mattered anyway if it wasn't done or paid for, because it was fully involved at the time of the loss. By the time the adjuster got there, there's mold on walls, everything's involved every place. And we just had an award come back at about 12 to 14% more than what the original award was.
The original amount from the carrier?
The original carrier, I'm sorry, not the original award, but the original payment, yeah.
What percentage of the total loss would that have been?
We went up to about 70%, from about 60 to about 70. And the way that the umpire did it, because he did not produce a scope, there's no way for the insured to actually collect his actual cash value back, because he doesn't know what he has to do to satisfy and complete the work for the ACV.
So it almost creates that's so weird.
I am dumbfounded. I have lost sleep over this. What in the world could I have done differently?
I don't know that there's anything you could have done differently, but
I thought of a couple things. I did. They're not things like you would think you would ever have to do, especially after I vetted the umpire the way I vetted the umpire. You wouldn't think you would have to do it.
But what do you think maybe you could have done different with the umpire going into it? And I don't think that this necessarily would give you any power. I'm just saying maybe.
The only thing I could think of that I could have done that would have improved the outcome, honestly, would be I've worked on this document. We've actually talked about it before. You'll remember this. If I would have created a memorandum of appraisal, all right, I've already put the adjuster through are you going to do everything you're supposed to do? Are you conflicted? Do you have the background? Do you have the understanding? Can you write this? Can you understand this technically? I've already done all that. But what I didn't do is I didn't make the umpire and the rest of the panel agree that we will produce an actual detailed estimate that will provide both their and my opinions, which is what my comparison matrix does. I wrote it that way for a purpose. And then if the umpire sees that, they have the opportunity, if he's going to act as a traditional umpire, to rule between the two opposing positions. And then it becomes apparent, if I have 6 line items that have visible damage associated with them, and my opposing hasn't said, I don't think those 6 line items are supposed to be in there, then my umpire would typically award me my 6 line items. Or then it becomes apparent that my umpire changes it, does it with a different number, different units, different labor, different category, selector, price, whatever. And then my umpire becomes a third appraiser. So what I didn't do is I could have created a document that would have codified this, or at least made it apparent up front that people weren't going to do it, that they weren't willing to do the best behavior possible in producing that estimate, in identifying both positions on every line item where there is not agreement, and then upon the umpire actually being transparent in what they actually chose and why, so that they can become responsible. See, if you want to choose between 2 positions, then that's my position, their position, they're agreeing with one position, they're kind of siding up with one person or the other for a set of reasons. If they're going to change everything, then again, they become an appraiser, and they should probably have to become responsible for the validity of what they're doing and take the risk of it.
Doesn't it seem to you that there's a lot of problems with adjusting, scoping, appraising, whatever fire? Don't you
Oh my
notice
God,
that
yes.
there's more aberrance in that area than other places? Um, and the I think I know the why. Actually, I think the why is because you're getting most of the adjustment on this fire at the desk, and it's like walking in the water loss and feeling the humidity and the smell and just the nuance that you get with your big brain and your eyes, right? And your
Right.
nose and all your senses. I think they never get that at the carrier whenever it's the desk adjuster, because they're in a debilitating position because they haven't been able to they can't conceive it the same way. I mean, I can't even look at a Matterport or some 3D and conceive it the same way. Um, and I mean, I think the problem is most of the desk adjusters have never adjusted a claim, and I don't know how to overcome that. I'm just saying it just
Well,
seems like a
no, it's
systemic
actually
problem.
simple. Stop grabbing somebody fresh out of college, giving them a 4-week training practice or training course, giving them not policies to memorize and read, but a checklist instead of what they can and can't pay for, and a little blurb in the policy if they're forced to give it. We need to stop having those people be put in that position by adjusting firms and carriers, and instead we need to have qualified, competent people that understand what's actually going on out in the field, or they need to shift their responsibility back out to their field adjusters who have that. When I was an adjuster, I had a bunch of zeros after my draft authority. All right, there were companies I had up to 7 figures with, and nobody gave me garbage. I noted everything. They knew me. I knew them. They trusted me. They might call and ask a question because the number's bigger than what they expected, but they generally found in the estimate what they were looking for and the reasoning behind it. They just may need a little paragraph to, help it push it along the rest of the way, a little bit of lubrication to finish out the trip, kind of goes, so to speak. So I think that unfortunately we're getting people that are just not properly trained for it, experienced for it, and then they can't push it back out. It wasn't like this inside adjuster cut the scope that was provided by the IA. They didn't. They paid based on it. Now, it took them a year and change to pay on it, and drafts got lost, and there was other kinds of shenanigery, involved in it. But it's not like they got in the way and did like you and I see a bunch where the IA sends something in, and then somebody at the desk decides that they're going to go back through and change it wholesale. And that happens a lot as well. So I do think there's a way around it. The problem is our industry is not heading that direction. You just wait till it's a drone taking pictures and an AI writing a scope. And then they'll blame it on the person who created the algorithm for the AI when the scope's not sufficient.
Yeah, well, the thing is that will the day that happens, we will have a degree of alternative disputes that are just unbelievable.
That will be an IAPA attorney contractor bonanza for quite a while. Because there's just no way you can program that machine to understand what's behind that wall, because it just doesn't get the context.
Just think of the level of fraud you could commit with that, though. You have some contractor show up and say, "Miss Smith, I just need to put these stickers on your wall."
Yeah.
I mean, like,
I just decorated the house for your inspection.
Yeah.
I've got one in Wisconsin. I've got one in Wisconsin right now that's about an 8,000 square foot house. And there was a fire on one end and a fireplace. And it doesn't look terrible throughout the rest of the building until I get out there with the engineer, and I hired a local industrial hygienist. And what we did is, over 3 trips, I've flown out there 3 or 4 times now, over 3 or 4 trips, we have pathed that smoke up to and through the framing from one end of the house literally to the other. And there are portions of the house where the interior face of the wall is simply not affected. You could wipe it and it's clean. However, if you open it up, your favorite word, interstitial cavity, is actually full of smoke. And it's all the way through the building. And what's going to end up happening is the entire 8,000 plus square foot structure, not including 3,000 square feet of basement, is all going to have to get gutted, all going to have to get cleaned. And it's inching towards it. As the insureds are eating up all of their ALE, the scope gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And I walked in and told them what it was going to be up front. And they pushed back, and I said, well, I'll do this in parts if you'd like. But it's still going to be what it is. And this is the problem with fire. It goes every place. This job, there's no excuse for anybody not knowing this. This was a huge bleb event. And we've talked about the pressures that are created upon extinguishment that are associated with bleb events. It pushes it every place. This should have never happened. And this is why I think that it's probably going to see the light of day again, is that as an appraiser, not to catch the other side, but in order to make sure that the entire panel knew everything, as my work went through, everything was documented, everything was added. Each one of those points was added into my report. They received copies of everything that was the basis for why this house should be, a functional gut, a functional teardown. And yet, they behaved in a way that is inconsistent and basically, if you're going to ask my opinion, readjusted the claim, depriving the insured of the opportunity to have the full benefit of their policy. And I don't talk about policies very often, but in reality, that's what happened. Them making the decision at some point that some of the damage that they could clearly see, that was clearly represented in my scope, that was clearly documented, was not covered, is a coverage decision. And it doesn't belong there. That's the carrier's job.
It's almost, how sometimes I'll ask people, I need to get at your philosophy, at your theology, I should say.
Yeah.
I want to understand your theology. I had a fire, and I asked my desk adjuster, I said, what's your theology about fire? And she said, I don't know what you mean. And I said, what's your theology? What do you think fire does when it gets in a structure? And she says, well, it makes a big mess. And I says, does it make a big mess in the walls or just outside the walls? And she said, you're going to tell me inside the walls. I said, no, I asked your theology, not mine. I said, because if I'm going to make you a true believer, I need to find where your holes are, where your theology is. And so I can give you proof that gives you faith in this other thing. And she said, no one's ever asked me that before. And I said, well, it's important. I said, you remember, and you remember this, you learned this in your first adjuster course you ever took, that what was the first 168 line policy? What was it called?
It's a fire policy.
That's right, because it was the one peril which was catastrophic.
Right.
And even if it didn't destroy the entire property, it was still catastrophic to the property because it did such substantial damage.
Right.
And I think to some degree we've lost that theology on this in
because
particular.
People are getting lists, not training.
Right. And the other thing is they don't understand the data often that's coming to them. And to that point, what I wanted to ask you about is you deal with remote monitoring a lot. And in all these cases that we talk about, okay, we talk about lots, and you and I have talked about lots online and off for a long time. How would remote monitoring ameliorate some of these issues that we see consistently on claims?
Well, when you got a fire claim, and oh, by the way, for those of you that think that I'm like contractor centric in my thinking about how I adjust and put together file, or not adjust, but how I work and put together files. All right. Guys, you have to remember, I started off as an adjuster. I was taught to build a file by my father, who was vice president and claims manager of Indiana Insurance Company, or claims manager of Indiana Insurance Company for 28 years. They were taught to go find the damage. And that's one of the big shifts that we've seen here is they don't teach adjusters how to go find damage and then go into the policy and proactively find coverage. Everybody's working off of a checklist. And then, you know what? That's not fair. You and I both know some very good independent adjusters.
Well, I don't even think this is about the independent adjusters. I see consistent performance from independent adjusters. Very consistent. I don't see it coming out the other side very well.
I had an adjuster contact me and say, okay, I need for you to explain to me how we control silica for a responsible demolition. Or explain to me, I have somebody who says that it went all the way from end to end of the house and it's smoke. Okay, so this is what you asked them for. When I say they're not getting training, they're getting checklists, I was taken out in the field and I was literally shown. My contractors trained me. My contractors showed me. I showed up and said, I don't understand why you need to do this. Can you show me why? And they're like, absolutely. And they would take me and they would run and they would like, all right, so here's what we're going to do. You take pictures of this. And then we're going to take pictures of this once you have everything torn off. And then we'll walk through and you'll see what happened. And I did that. And I did that. And I did for years. I did that. We don't have, for all the training we get, for all the training, and by the way, in the water damage industry, most of our training isn't around functional stuff. Most of our training is around understanding definitions and general practices and procedures, not the really specific stuff. Tell me what BPA does to your, if you have it, or tell me how many carcinogens there are in fire. Tell me the difference between what an oil fire and a plastic fire and a protein fire do in the way that it affects your building, the way that it goes into hygroscopic materials, whether it's cleanable or not. Nobody's getting that kind of training, so that when you see scopes that have entire guts, you look at that and you're like, it looks fine to me, must be a crook. No, if you knew what the contractor knew, you would probably have a real different opinion about it. And because carriers will hardly let contractors and adjusters mix and mingle anymore, I used to be able to go out and have a beer with a adjuster. I had contractors take me out, and as a contractor, I took them out. And then a meal became a beer, and a beer became a cup of coffee, and then they couldn't even sit in the same room with me anymore. And what we've done is we've cut off the ability for adjusters to get that real-world experience that helps give context to the stuff. And the better contractors get at understanding what needs to be going on, if we don't have that same kind of in tandem movement with the adjusters, contractors are the really good ones are going to look like the biggest crooks. And the problem is, if you don't understand it, you won't know what to look for as an adjuster. And then when you really do find a crook, you don't know how to prosecute him, because it looks like the guy who really knows what he's doing. And then we conflate the guy who knows what he's doing and the guy who's stealing. They look the same, and nobody knows how to tell the difference between the two of them. And now guess what? We don't give credibility to the guy who's stealing. We call the guy who's doing what he's supposed to do a crook. And that's how we get where we're at. And the only thing that fixes that is real, actual, honest to God, in the field training. Something that nobody's getting, because you've isolated your carrier side and your adjusting side and neutered the independent, by the way. Independents don't do full charge adjusting hardly ever. Not until they're on very large loss. They're on appraisal only. They're there to collect information and take pictures. So the most knowledgeable person in the entire process is not making any of the calls. They're just saying, I see damage. And then we're throwing it back to people who don't have any of the understanding. They're not terrible. They need help. They need somebody to explain it to them, and they need for people not to put them. Used to be you couldn't be a desk adjuster until you had 5-10 years of field experience, because they knew what happened if you did that. Exactly what's happening now. And they get the severity control that they so desperately want at the expense of rampant litigation, because you have really legitimate, competent contractors that are saying these things need to be done, and you have desk adjusters saying, but that doesn't match my checklist. And no matter how much the contractor says, because we've isolated the contractor and the carrier apart, and they can hardly ever talk or speak or do something meaningfully, I went and worked with my contractors. I worked on their crews, so I understood. And my insurance company wanted me to do that. They paid me to go do that. So I would have a depth of understanding that meant I knew and I understood and I could do the job the way the job needed to be done. None of this happens anymore.
So one of the problems that you have in the industry in general is you've seen it done right.
You wouldn't think that's a problem, but it sure does sniff out like one occasionally.
No, I mean it's like having it creates a real disjointed way of thinking if you've seen it done right a lot. That's one of my problems. I've seen it done right a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, I got my start in the industry by working with executive general adjusters and estimating very, very large losses that we worked together to figure out what was what. And I didn't even know there was anything like animus in our industry at all.
Yeah. And there wasn't. There wasn't until after Katrina. Katrina turned everything.
She changed everything.
She did.
She was the most
extreme. The biggest problem is contractor cannot even convey. How about like this? In high school, I took Calc 1 and Calc 2. You know what? There's addition in Calc 1 and Calc 2. Just because a kindergartner may know how to do math and do addition, does that mean they understand calculus if somebody tries to explain it to them? Nope. Try to explain derivatives to a kindergartner. It's just math. It's just multiplication, division. All right? And this is the problem we're having, is that we're giving elementary education to people who need high school and college, and some of them postgraduate educations. And it creates the environment where there's constantly this between people who probably would agree if they knew the same information. And this is the problem. They don't know the same information. And the way we're going, they're not going to get it. This is what winds up at TPAs and TPCs. Spend lots of my time with the big 3 or 4. And you know what? Until I get to their senior management, I'm still not talking to somebody who understands functionally and in depth what needs to be done. They can't even read my report. They'll look at my report and they'll look at something that I knew if they understood it, they couldn't do it a different way, David. If in the appraisal that we're talking about right now, if he would have really read my report, if my opposing had read my report, there's no way on God's green earth that they would have subverted what the building official said and what the engineer said. That is kind of the silliest thing in the world to do. You want to talk about setting yourself up for a world of hurt? No, I know better than the guy who's going to write the permit, confirm the work, and enforce the code. We as a carrier are going to do that. And see, this is what I don't get. How in the world can we have, and you may want to cut this out, but this is the conversation. How can we have something in appraisal that subverts the intent and purpose of the policy? How can an appraisal award do that? Apply an appropriate policy limitation or exclusion as a carrier, yes. But how can an appraisal in its proper application, I don't want to say defraud, but how can it so profoundly prejudice the insured's contractual rights and the carrier's policy duties? How can that be let stand? That cannot be the intention of an appraisal policy when it was originally written. It just can't. because it's antithetical to the actual policy in and of itself.
Yeah, but I mean, it all comes. It's really simple though. The purpose of appraisal is to set the value of the loss.
It is, but that's not the way it's being done. And where's
But that's the whole thing. And so it's super simple. If you will not act with that definition, it's never coming out all right.
But this is where there should be accountability. There should be, and I know I've talked to attorneys about this, there's got to be some way to legally say, you know what? They did something that is inconsistent with the intent of the policy, the clear, plain writing. They have subverted the benefit, and they didn't do it in a fashion that was allowable under the policy. Therefore, it just can't allow it to be standard. And I know courts hate upturning or upending appraisal, because once one does it, then they're going to see gazillions of them. But it's being inappropriately used, in my opinion.
Well, here's the thing. This is what I've told appraisers and umpires, and it makes them crazy. Okay, because a lot of them don't believe this. But one of the problems you have is that people don't understand, if you break the rules of like, kind, and quality, if you break the rules of direct physical loss, if you just absolve yourself of that in appraisal, and you go ink something like that, whether you're umpire or appraiser, you can at least expect your errors and omissions coverage to get tapped. And you're probably going to get sued because you did something that was outside of what you should be doing. And here's the real bad joke. Okay. Let's say if you as umpire just decided to go split the baby, you had no rational basis for what you did, and you didn't deal with direct physical damage. You didn't fix direct physical damage in the loss. It wasn't,
and then left it ambiguous in the award.
Right. Okay. So what you did was intentional. So there's a good chance your E&O coverage is not going to protect you, because they don't protect you for fraud. And the thing is, we're going to have a chill in the industry real soon. I've already seen it start. I've seen it start in Florida. I've seen it done in Texas. I've seen it done in Oklahoma. I've seen some things where violating the rules of like, kind, and quality has been detrimental to people. And it's fixed things for the insured, but the professionals that were supposed to be doing it right to begin with. And I think we ought to have a healthy fear when we go do our work. Are we doing this as per the definition that we're supposed to be doing it under? And if we can't do that, we probably shouldn't be in the game. If you're that scared of doing your job, if doing your job correctly is going to cause you not to get any more work, then...
And I'm beginning to wonder if that's really an issue, Dave. Truly. Do we have parties that are so terrified of losing their next call in their relationship that it's affecting what they're doing? And I don't want to accuse it, but I don't see another explanation for it.
Hey, look, I've been told...
I heard somebody... Here's something I'll tell you. I had a very good friend of mine just tell me that in a very large carrier in a very warm state, that when they do their appraisal, and do you want to finish it for me? Because I bet you know it. When they do an appraisal, what do they have to do?
They have to turn their position into the carrier.
You've heard that too.
Before the appraisal, and it needs to be less than the carrier estimated.
Yeah. That's what my friend told me. And I don't have a problem believing it either. Because when you see a scope, have you experienced that yet, personally?
Yes.
Did the omissions or the cuts make sense in light of the actual damage? If they had to explain, I took out $20,000 in these 7 line items, is there any way they could explain that reasonably and rationally?
Let me tell you what's happening in those appraisals. I mean, it happens every time. That baby's going to the umpire from Jump Street. Okay, and so you're cleaning up. They're managing to keep fraud away from the other side whenever it's fraudulent. Okay, so when the insured side is fraudulent, they're using that umpire to avoid that. So they're driving a wedge so that basically the umpire makes some decisions, and they're winning by that. It's still getting them where they want to go in a reasonable way often, but you could have just gone into it with good faith. I mean, I closed an appraisal last week where me and my opposing just came to an agreement that made great sense. It was easy.
Right.
And if he had been polluted in some way, he couldn't have done that. And so it's upsetting on that level. But look.
Well, how many times have you been told lately, hey, David, I agree with you. I just can't sign it.
Yeah. And look, when I teach appraisal, I tell people, if you need to be close enough to your opposing so that your opposing can tell you if they're polluted, so that they can negotiate with you in good faith, and then have the umpire take it from there. And that's the only way to do it. And it's sad because, you know, like a lot of those folks that are standing there working in that position, and they're being, you know, they're being cut off at their knees, and it's painful to watch. And look, I mean, I'm watching. I had an award come in last week for one of my appraisers. It was one of 3 with the same umpire, and his work product is substantially different than it was even 6 months ago. And it does not take a rocket scientist to figure out what's going on there.
Yeah.
Like, he's feeling pressure somewhere. And anytime somebody feels pressure for their livelihood, it becomes a dangerous scene.
See, but we've lost what we originally had, which was, as a panel, we would get together and go hunt for the truth. I got what they had, they got what I had, and we came together and we're like, yep, that was done. Let's check that off. That's the whole idea of my comparison builder, is that any line item that's the same, it gets removed from what goes, you've seen it before, it gets removed from what goes to the umpire. And then it has 2 positions if there's any disagreement on it.
Do you know the most upsetting thing about that one job you did? That appraisal we've been talking about?
I don't know. There's so much.
It wasn't done close to home. Okay? It wasn't done close to home. I expect some of this stuff close to home, in a warm place. Okay?
I'm having it right now on one in my over in Daytona Beach.
Yeah,
Same kind of stuff.
But when we start seeing that in other areas of the world, like you just saw it in an area of the world that was many states away from where you live.
Right. You know where it was.
And when those things happen, it kind of breaks my heart. It makes me not very hopeful, to be honest with you. I will tell you that there are lots of places on Earth, though, that don't function that way, that work better most of the time.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'll tell you this. I mean, I have an appraisal right now. They're gonna detach and reset 30-year-old vinyl siding that has no insulation behind it, no house wrap. Like, you can't take it off and not put that stuff back on it, and you're not going to be able to put the siding back up. I have gapped sheathing, and instead of replacing it with like, kind, and quality, it's 1x6s. They have scoped to overlay it with 1/2-inch OSB. Now, lots of people say that's better, but it's still not like, kind, and quality, and it still has some other things that have to be done right. If you did that, it wouldn't have to be done right otherwise. So I couldn't figure out why in the world the scope that they came up with was like so deficient in so many ways, like obscenely deficient. And it's not that huge of a claim. Okay. I mean, this is not a hard one. This is something we get together in an afternoon and fix this one just in no time. I mean, it's just not that hard. But here's the rub. In this particular municipality, if the building is 30% damaged to its value, and that's really like taxable value,
Right.
That means what? That means that they have to bring it to code.
So we shouldn't be having the conversation in the first place.
So what's really going on here is my opposing is keeping it under a number because he knows if he steps any farther on his number, he's going to trip that mark, and that's going to turn it basically into constructive total loss. I get it. Okay. I also get that there's nothing I can do about it. And this is going to be super interesting. And I would bet you my bottom dollar that when it's over, it's not going to be over.
No, because I'm going to guess that there was an agent that underwrote the value of this property so that you wouldn't have such a problem. Is it the correct number?
No, actually, the guy at the property is the insurance agent. Anyway,
no. Well, I guess that means one person he's not suing.
No. I mean, what's going to happen is the panel is going to be called to task when he has essentially a loss where he's going to have to basically tear his house down.
Right.
That's only representative of about 10% of its worth. Whenever to pull a permit, you'd have to do all the rest of this.
Right.
And that's where it's going to get. And so.
And that's why I thought maybe the agent would be called to task for underinsuring the structure.
No, the guy's got good policy. I mean, he's got good coverage as far as I can see. He's just, I mean, what they're setting him up for is I mean, I've never really had this on a consistent basis. Okay. I've never really had a consistent basis where I knew that this particular file that I'm on is going to turn into a mess after it's over. Like, I don't usually think about that. I think about this. We're playing sudden death. It's over when it's over. We're done. Blah, blah, blah.
Yay!
And lately I've had to think more of like, oh my God, this is not over. And, I mean, you can go to, you can go look up at the CRNs, what does CRN stand for?
Civil remedy notice.
Yes, that's right. So we're in Florida, for example, and you can look up pretty much any of these umpires and appraisers and see civil remedy notices with their names in them. And that used to never happen.
Wow.
Just never happened. Yeah. But
again, I think we're subverting the intention of the policy in the way that these things are being done. And it's like the foul that nobody will call.
Yeah, I think it's going to get called, though.
Yeah. Well, people are not going to be in any position to do it.
Well, I think we're going to start doing something different. We're going to start changing the ground, because whenever people act outside of the narrow focus of the idea that you're doing the amount of the loss, once you finish that, I mean, I think once you step out of that, I think that you put yourself in some liability standpoint. And I think that's going to be super interesting. So you got a big week?
Yeah, I think I'm going to need to make a quick West Coast visit out to Oregon, and maybe one out to LA too. Maybe I can work in for a couple new projects that came in out there, a fire and a water damage.
Yeah,
and
a little warm out there right now.
Yeah, I know. God, it's warm every place. So anyway, yeah, probably heading out. Got a trial to get kind of ramped up for, and picked up about $30 million of appraisals. First one's coming in. It's small. It's under $1 million, but there's 2 more coming after that. So we have things to do.
Yes, we
Work
do.
to be done. Fun to occur.
Yeah, I've got a depot at 8 a.m. in the morning about a cast iron pipe claim.
Ooh. So hey,
I don't like cast iron pipe.
Yeah,
claims.
I know.
Yeah,
I know. I'm not real fond of them either. But carriers have to change the way they write their policies if they want to do it. If you write yourself a liability without intending to write yourself a liability and don't collect premium for it, then and that's what you have to do, rather than blame the rather than blame the attorneys and the contractors and this and that, you got to go back and you got to fix your underwriting and your policies, because it happened.
Yeah, it's as simple as that. I find it to I
You
I
struggle with it, I'm guessing, because it's old. It's
well,
old and it's complicated and it feels like you shouldn't.
yeah, well, it makes me always think about those galvanized pipes that had a
Right,
life of about 15 years, and then they just started falling apart.
right,
Um, Nobody ever covered those,
right.
you
But they
know.
do cover the cast iron.
And so it's super interesting, and I guess it was just one crafty attorney at some point that figured that out. But but no, I mean, I'm happy to do the work, and I'm happy about to say the facts. But it's just like, it's like eating cardboard. It's like
It's not my it's not my favorite meal.
yeah.
I can eat it. I can choke it down, but
Yeah, it's like
so,
I would much rather it be a fire or something like that. But
yeah.
but anyway, but
You did ask me a question
mhm,
earlier on, and it was about remote monitoring,
mhm.
and within the context of a fire loss, the contractor, if the contractor could have used remote monitoring, and bear in mind there's no contractor because we had a constructive total a weekend, and there's no reason to be spending tons and tons of money stabilizing or cleaning up something that's completely involved in a fire. All right. So it's not the best one to probably have the discussion centered around. But where remote monitoring is concerned, there's a lot of questions that can be answered very, very well, and a lot of conflict that can be avoided with remote monitoring. This one that I have that's up north, there is a TPC that came back and said, we don't think you needed to have remote monitor or needed to have dehumidification. This happens to be a place that you could have just used the normal heat in the building and the outside conditions, which were sufficient, and you would have never had a problem with secondary growth amplification, additional damages. With remote monitoring, we were able basically to come back, and I did this because I've done this before. It's a large condominium loss. I tolerance tested it. So what we did is every so often, I'll come back in and we'll turn off all the dehumidification on a day. We'll turn it off and we'll let it acclimate overnight. And then we'll take a set of readings for what our humidity levels are at equilibrium after somewhere between 12 and 18 hours. And then we'll turn back on half of the equipment and see where that fixes the humidity control issues to prevent secondary damage. And then the next day we'll turn on half of what's left. And then the next day we'll turn on half of what's left. And eventually we'll hit either that we had the correct balance point in the first place, or that we could get by with a little less, or sometimes we needed some more. We would actually tolerance test this. And what ended up happening is their premise was they didn't need to pay for anything, because as far as they were concerned, the building at equilibrium could theoretically, with exterior conditions, be okay. Now, lots of holes in that. Lots of theoretical, right? And as I explained to them when I talked to them, like, you guys need to be realistic when you're talking to a contractor, because a contractor's job isn't to do as little as they possibly can to possibly prevent further damage. Their hurdle and threshold is entirely different. Their hurdle and threshold is to apply the standard of care, best practice, and to ensure that no damage happens, because the policy doesn't say do your best and if there's damage, oopsies. The policy says prevent further damage. It's a rather direct, rather succinct statement. So yes, maybe less could be used, but you can't beat on a contractor that provided an environment that clearly made sure that nothing happened. Now, if you're a really smart contractor or a really smart consultant working on behalf of a contractor, and by the way, I do this on residential structures too. You go through, back that back out. So what I did is I could give them a couple of occasions where I'd done a tolerance test like that. And with all the dehumidification off, half the dehumidification off, quarter of the dehumidification off, 10% of the dehumidification off, we could not create an environment that was within our agreed upon stabilization condition. And what that meant to the contractor was he didn't just lose or have to argue about 2 to 3 months of stabilization across an entire condominium association.
So
that's millions of dollars at the end of the day, because we could prove it was really, truly necessary. It was dry before then. No, let's take you back and let you look at the moisture content of the materials. But you're not drying. Congratulations, that's what stabilization is. You're right, we're not drying. We have just enough in to hit our 35 to 50% relative humidity threshold.
Why are you not drying? Why weren't you drying?
Because here's the problem, and we had this discussion. If you want us to dry the building with all the materials in place, we still have to stabilize it until we can complete our remediation. Otherwise, we've not done our job properly, and we're exposed for that. So if I dry it first, you're going to complain that I dried materials that needed to come out in the first place, and then you're still going to have to stabilize it when we get all done until we can complete our work, which, if you hadn't argued with us for about 3 months, could have gone a whole lot faster than it has. The other side of it is, if we do that and we just stabilize it, you're upset because we continue to stabilize. But you're only upset because we stabilized because it's taken you 3 months to let us do and give us consent to do the work that we need to do in full anyway.
And so you were able to report that data because you had remote monitoring on this expansive loss. Okay, so it becomes a different argument. I just think that
no, you know what we've done is they wanted to have an argument war, an opinion war. Their opinion was it wasn't necessary and that the structure was dry. What they got instead was they got about 300 pages of facts that indicated it was entirely different. And that's this is one of the most wonderful things about remote monitoring is it turns opinion wars into a discussion of facts, or at best, a fact fight. I'll take a fact fight any day over an opinion war.
Sounds good.
You can't do it at the end.
Right. What this reminds me of a story. This preacher went out to go see one of his parishioners out on a farm. And he walks up on the porch on this preacher's house, and they sit down in their rocking chairs and they're talking. And about every 15 seconds, this hound dog that was sitting on the edge of the porch just wailed, like in pain. And after about 5 minutes of this, the preacher looked at his parishioner, to the farmer, and said, "What's wrong with your dog?" He says, "Oh, preacher, don't you know? He's just sitting on a nail." He says, "Well, why doesn't he move?" And he says, "Because you can get used to anything, don't you know?" And I think that a lot of our industry, and the fact that people don't use remote monitoring, is because people are accustomed to sitting on a nail. And I think that if we brought better data and we could have better discussions. And it's just that simple.
But there's one qualifier that goes underneath that, and it's the dirty little secret of our industry. I'm going to say it real quiet. Don't tell anybody. This reveals the fact that the vast majority of people that we work with don't understand how to dry a structure. They know how to set equipment in it, but they don't understand the physics that surround what dries materials. And they don't know how to control it. And by the way, coming soon to a TPC near you will be not just what did you do and how did you do it, but what's coming is why. And when they get done with why, it's going to be the one that's going to kill you. Wasn't there a better way? So if you're telling, I did this for this reason, right? I did it this way, and I could have done it 3 other ways. And the 3 other ways wouldn't have worked as well because of this and this and this. That's why I did it that way. And here's the result of it. That's what makes it stick. That's why people hire me.
Yeah, but the thing is, most of the people in our industry don't do the science
because they don't understand it. No one's taught it.
And well, I
They
mean, they've
really
got,
aren't. And if they
well,
are, it's the managers and the owners that are taught it.
well, that's
My
your job. You need
technicians
to go,
understood this.
you need to go treat somebody. Need to go teach more people about that. Because I mean, look,
Yeah.
I watched you train a very good public adjuster on this a while back. And I've watched everything about his practice change because he's going in and talking to the mitigation people going in and being able to tell them about the science of what they're doing and actually being assistive. And his entire, even his communication and what he's doing with the carrier has changed. And that's just awesome. And I think that you've got to sharpen you've just got to sharpen the saw. You got to learn more. And I mean, like, David, you've challenged me on a bunch of things, and you've taught me a bunch of things, and it's always based in science, and I've always appreciated it because you've dragged me kicking and screaming on something, all the while
I think
calming me
that's good.
down when you brought me facts. No, I mean it's good because
Yeah.
I mean I have stinking thinking just like anybody else. I have things that I don't agree with just like everybody else that aren't based in good fact. You know,
And you know,
and
that's most of the industry, though, David. Most of the industry is not terrible. We got to stop pointing fingers across at other people and suggesting that they're terrible, horrible people, when what the vast majority of them are is just unaware. There's an enormous difference between seeing something and understanding something. It's that gap in functional knowledge. You can think that smoke can't go all the way through the house until you've been out there, yanked everything down, and watched and seen it yourself. This is the problem. And I think we need to be super aware and super. We need to be kind to each other. I run into unprincipled people on a really regular basis. More often than not, though, nobody ever told them. You just can't expect people to know what nobody told them. There's nobody on the carrier side, even though I keep trying to teach them. You know, if you happen to listen to this, you're a carrier, please have me in and let me teach. It's the truth. It's the facts. You're going to wind up dealing with it anyway. You might as well know it and understand it up front. Same thing for PAs, same thing for IAs, same thing for attorneys. The facts are the facts are the facts are the facts. And the reason that we have such good results is I won't let somebody place an opinion where my fact should have gone. You'll have the same result as well. And you have to not presume people are terrible, horrible, and unethical creatures. You have to instead realize they just were probably never told.
you know, to that end,
And
to
then
that
when they throw their temper tantrum, keep telling them they'll be okay.
well, like to that end, you know, I joke about it, but you know, I always tell people that you know, your desk adjuster isn't the problem. Your desk adjuster is you know, like when I talk to my desk adjuster on my claim, I always finish my call the same way. I appreciate you advocating for me. I
Right.
appreciate your care for me in this process. I know you have to go several levels to do this, and I know you have to figure out what's important and how to take it. And I appreciate it. I appreciate what you do.
Right.
And the entire thing is different when we appreciate them.
It is.
And I think that we still have to remember that we are human, and humans love respect.
Yeah.
And I think that and I'll say it again, and I say it often, some of the best people I know in this business work exclusively for the carrier.
Yeah.
And of those ones that are really educated are like superheroes.
For those of you who don't think that there's room on the carrier's roster for really truly competent people, you're wrong. You are wholesalely wrong, because there is. We know them. David and I both know these people. All right.
Oh yeah.
They are there. They do exist. And you know what? I think there's more of them than there used to be,
Mm-hmm.
because
You know,
they're fighting AI just like everyone else. These guys are contacting you and me both to up their game, to learn the stuff they don't know, right? Because they realize that they're going to have to grow in competency and understanding if they want to remain relevant in the face of these other technologies and these large monolithic systems that are, you see being propagated in the industry as a whole. So, man, there's a lot of change going on. We didn't have a whole lot of change in the insurance industry for a real long time. Guys, don't think the ride's going to get any smoother for a bit. I think we're in for a whole lot of bumps.
For a bit.
For a bit, yes, we are. Yeah, but so be kind to each other. And David, you taught me a bunch of things, most of which I can't repeat in polite company. But I do really appreciate them. Even some of the jokes that I can't even tell myself because I blush. No, that's not true. Just a little true. Just have it. I've been hard pressed to find somebody who is a better strategy or statistician than you are, honestly. You are intentional and purposeful, and highly technical as well. It's not easy to disagree with you over time. You part of your magic sauce is that you can keep people on the hook long enough to help them understand that they're missing a part of the picture, they like the medicine.
Yeah, my thing is I don't like to browbeat people if I can avoid it.
Yeah.
And that's not always possible. Just before we go, I'll tell you about this one thing that I just got off of that was so cool. Meet my adjuster, my opposing appraiser. We climb up on the roof on this place, and he says, on your estimate and the carrier's estimate, we missed like 3 of these air conditioning units. I'm like, oh yeah. And he says, so we got to do this and this and this, right? I'm like, yeah. He goes, and that's on your estimate, right? I said, yeah. And we just went through it. And as we're climbing down the ladder, he says, there was a couple other things you missed, but I'm going to go ahead and put them on paper and we'll have this awarded tomorrow. Okay. And like, I wanted to kiss him on the lips because he was just like, I cannot believe that you exist, that you created a better outcome than I could have created on my own.
Right.
Like that's so cool. And
but that's the way it's supposed to work.
Yeah, I want that
to happen. As a panel, if we all work together, everybody produces a better outcome than any singular party could have been. And it's more honorable to the intent and the application of the policy typically as well. Because that Amen. Policy, it's designed to give you its full benefit. We forget that. It means to give you everything it owes you. It's just people that get in the way of that.
That is true. All right, man. Well, you have a good day. I appreciate you being here, buddy. Talk to you soon. Peace, brother.